I mentioned before, as a Bear fan, how sad it's been to see the decline in importance and, frankly, talent level in the running back position, in particular, over the past 8 to 10 years. It does sadden me quite a bit. Now, as a Bear fan, there's another position that I'm used to seeing a lot of great players at, and that's a linebacker position. It's one of those positions that does have a soft spot in my heart as a football fan, no question about it. When you grow up on Mike Singletary and you have your adult life, you watch Brian Urlacher and Lance Briggs, you get a bit spoiled. And when it's an organization that through the years has had Hall of Famers like Bulldog Turner and George Connor and Bill George and Dick Butkus and another guy who should be a Hall of Famer someday, and Joe Fortunato. This is an organization with a great pedigree of linebacker play throughout its history. The point I'm getting at here is I look at the linebacker position, especially from a 4-3 standpoint, and I see a degrading in the importance of the linebacker position in recent years, unless you're talking about 3-4 outside linebackers. There's nothing wrong with that. It gives some guys that maybe couldn't play defensive end at the NFL level fresh legs and new life as an NFL prospect. See guys like Clay Matthews, for example. Kind of tweeners. If they're going to be viewed as a defensive end, you put them in a 3-4 outside linebacker position, and my God, they become big time impact players. And when you look at this 2013 linebacker class, it really helps that there are all these 3-4 outside linebackers being thrown into this mix, because otherwise this would be a very weak, piss poor linebacker core, no question about it. It still, to me, is a so-so class that definitely lacks elite talent to me, and a lot of the guys at the top in particular have at least one major burning question concerning them that makes me question whether or not they're going to be big time NFL players. Now, before I talk about my top 5 linebacking prospects, I'll throw out a couple of notable names here. You've seen C.O. Moore from UConn climbing up draft boards. He's probably going to be a second round pick. I like him. I don't necessarily love him as a prospect, but I do like him. I just wonder if he's one of those type of players that he's a better prospect than he is a player. I hope that makes sense to you. Now, another guy that I had a feeling once people went back and they got past all the hype and they started to analyze and look at the game film, look at the footage, they would start to realize that Demontre Moore was not necessarily the real deal and definitely was not a first round prospect. And you're seeing that now. I mean, it's gotten to the point now where he's having a fall similar to, let's say, what Michael Johnson out of Georgia Tech did a few years ago, where you were talking about at one point in time a guy being a potential top 5 pick to potentially going in the 3rd round. I look at Barkevius Mingo from LSU. I don't know why. I should like this guy more as a prospect, but I don't. I just wonder if he has that ability to really take over the game as a 3-4 outside linebacker. I mean, he had moments I thought where he was good at LSU, but there are also times that I saw him be completely taken out of plays, and I just didn't really see him dominate a lot. Now, some of you are going to say, oh, I saw him dominate, but I didn't see him dominate where I felt like he could dominate at the NFL level. And you're probably going to see Mingo get taken in the top 15. Sure, he has the type of physical talent to be taken there, but he also has a lot of bust potential. He's going to be one of those sink or swim guys when it comes to prospects. Like I said before, when I talk about these top 5 prospects for linebackers in this year's NFL draft, each one of them to me has at least one major question that concerns me about him. Arthur Brown from Kansas State is a player that when I watch him, I really, really like. I see a guy that I think could be an impact player as a weak side linebacker in the NFL. Maybe in terms of skill sets, when I see him, I do say a somewhat poor man's version, let's say, of a Levante David. But I do have to call bullshit on something. I see Arthur Brown often listed at 240 or 245 pounds. If he's 240 or 205 pounds, then I'm fucking Mr. Universe. I'm just saying. I might be the Schleg Daddy, but I'm not Mr. Universe. So there are going to be size concerns when it comes to Arthur Brown. And to me, he pretty much is limited to being a weak side linebacker in a team's 4-3 scheme. Some teams may think they can get away with playing him on the inside of a 3-4, perhaps. I don't. Some teams may think he could play inside in a 4-3. Maybe he could. So there are size concerns with him in the fact that a lot of teams now, frankly, aren't running 4-3 defenses anymore. So that may limit the potential suitors he has. But I do really like Arthur Brown, and I do think he could be a real gem out of this draft in 4 or 5 years from now. There hasn't been a more talked about linebacker, or frankly, a more talked about prospect in this year's NFL draft class than Manti Te'o from Notre Dame. When you look at Te'o, this was a guy that really did have a phenomenal senior year. He helped lead the Irish to an undefeated regular season record. He was a Heisman Trophy finalist. There were points at times where he was being viewed as a top 5, top 10 pick this year. But then he decided he was going to have a fake girlfriend. Then the Alabama game happened, and he looked very bad. And a lot of questions started to come. Now, I knew this was going to happen with Manti Te'o. Some people that have talked to me on Facebook, I proposed a scenario before the national title game even. I was asking, what would happen when he drops to pick number 20? What would the Bears do? Would they take him or would they pass on him? And, I was kind of poo-pooed at the time. There's no way that was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen. Now, I look at Te'o. Who knows? Maybe somebody falls in love with him. Maybe the Giants say at 19, fuck it, we'll take him. But I look at him, there are going to be those questions. Teams are going to be concerned about, will he be a distraction in the locker room? They're going to question his leadership. They're going to question his athleticism and his talent level if they watch the Alabama game film. I'm going to stand behind Manti Te'o. I still believe he's a first-round pick. I still believe he could be a very, very good middle linebacker in the NFL, maybe almost on the caliber of a James Laurinaitis. I know I'm going out on a bit of a limb here, but I really do like Manti Te'o. I thought he improved tremendously in coverage as a senior. It's never going to be a huge strong suit of his, but he definitely improved to the point where I do believe he could be a starting 3-down middle linebacker in the NFL, and a pretty damn good one. I get why a lot of teams are very high on Deion Jordan. He's about 6'6", 245, 250 pounds, with probably some room to grow. He's got really, really good athleticism, and he has tremendous coverage skills for a guy of his size. So teams are looking at him, and they are looking at him and saying, man, this is a new type of weapon for an outside linebacker in a 4-3 or in a 3-4. The upside with this guy is tremendous. And in theory, that is the case. But when I went back and watched a lot of his game footage at Oregon, I could say there were moments where I was impressed, but he wasn't a player that jumped off the tape and just said, wow. He didn't wow me as a prospect very much. I'm just being honest with you. And I think this might be an example of people are looking at what he did at the Combine, what he did at his pro day. They're looking at this and they're looking at that, and they're not paying enough attention to what the film tells them, what the game footage tells them. People are looking at him and saying, God, he's so great in coverage and this and that. And that might be the case. But I saw a guy who was not a tremendous pass rusher. I saw a guy who struggled at times to be a factor in the game. A lot of times he disappeared to me, quite frankly. I can see why he's viewed as such a top prospect, and I think he has a chance to be a good player in the NFL. But there's a lot of work to go before we start talking about him being a special player. And even though I wasn't a huge fan, to be fair, of the Broncos taking Von Miller number 2 overall 2 years ago, and I have to admit when I'm wrong about something, I was. But when I look at Deion Jordan and I compare him to Von Miller had special skills. Football skills, that is. Deion Jordan, to me, is a workout warrior who has nice physical traits, but has a long way to go to be thought of as that type of player. And I don't frankly think he is, because I don't know if he's ever going to be that type of pass rusher. Sure, he's going to be great in coverage, so it's nice to have him matching up against opposing teams' tight ends, and that might be one of the things he's more known for in the NFL. But do you really want to take a 3-4 outside linebacker in the top 5 or the top 10 of a draft when his number one skill isn't rushing the passer? Jarvis Jones from Georgia is a guy that is compared quite often to Von Miller. And I get some of those comparisons. Jarvis Jones at times did dominate in the SEC, and he did cause havoc on opposing quarterbacks and made other players that played on the defense better, such as, in particular, Alec Ogletree. Jarvis Jones has demonstrated that ability to dominate as a football player. And when I look at Jarvis Jones, he is a football player. He's not a guy that's going to work out well, and he didn't. He also has concerns about him in terms of his spinal stenosis and whether or not that's going to be a problem down the road for him, which may cause his draft stock to fall a little bit. That's why when you look at Jarvis Jones, his draft stock that I put in the description box below, he's a guy that could go in the top 10, and he's also a guy that could fall all the way into the beginning portion of the second round. Anywhere in between. I wouldn't be surprised if he's drafted anywhere in between. When I look at Jarvis Jones, I look at him and I say, hey, if I'm a team that is pretty good, and I'm maybe an impact edge rusher away from having a dominant defense, or I'm an impact player away from taking that next step, I'm looking at Jarvis Jones, and if I'm sitting there at somewhere between, let's say, 15 to 25 or 15 to 32 in this draft, to me, medical concerns aside, sometimes you have to take those risks. To me, Jarvis Jones is worth the risk. But with that being said, I don't think he's the best linebacking prospect in this draft class. My favorite linebacker prospect this year, and to me the best linebacker prospect, has to be Alec Ogletree from Georgia, Jarvis Jones' teammate. I look at a guy who has a lot of scheme versatility. I do believe he could play both inside and outside in a 4-3 and a 3-4. He has size, he has speed, he's good against the run, he can cover. To me, Alec Ogletree can pretty much do everything. And to me, he's a top 20 talent in this draft. Now, will he be drafted there? Maybe, maybe not. Because there are some character concerns with him. There's some off-the-field issues. He just got arrested a couple months ago for a DUI. But with all things being considered, when I look at Alec Ogletree, what cinched him being the #1 linebacking prospect in this class, now anybody could have a fake girlfriend. But it takes a real star to get arrested during the draft process. He got his DUI out of the way. That validates him to me as a star, by God, and I think Alec Ogletree is going to end up being a Pro Bowler in the NFL for several years, whether it's outside linebacker, inside linebacker, doesn't matter. And afterwards, we can all celebrate by having a drink and calling a designated driver. Frickin' superstar in the making he is.